Hello, everyone. Tonight on this special episode, we're going to ask the question: are you afraid to know the truth? This information is not for the faint of heart. We're going to dig into mysteries. They're so wondrous, they'll satiate the desires, both subtle and gross. We have Bill here. He knows about these things, he gets information. I don't have information. I hike, I go outdoors, I don't even watch the news. Bill, do you think
I'm,
people are ready for the truth?
I'm still stuck on the word satiate right now. I'm still there on that.
Satisfied.
What's
Those
that?
who have this hunger for this knowledge need to know.
I wouldn't call my channel a hiking channel. I would say I can't get my camera right here. I think that's a conspiracy in and of itself.
It
There you
absolutely is.
go. The
I'm a hiking channel.
You are a hiking channel. I wouldn't, but I think if you're into hiking and you've ever had some late nights hiking where you're not back to your car until like midnight or so, and I've had a few of those,
Yeah.
you can get kind of wigged out in the dark when you're on the trail, kind of freaking out back there, thinking about Bigfoot, aliens, lineal time, all this craziness. I would say I've been interested in some of these topics probably since I was a kid. And I wouldn't go as far as to call myself a ufologist. We'll talk about that later. But I'm definitely interested in the topic. And sometimes we have a surface level understanding of certain things and not understanding how much thought has gone into these topics for decades and decades and decades, in some cases, even centuries. So, yeah, it's pretty interesting to me.
I'm outdoors a lot. And sometimes, like you said, I get a chill, maybe when it's not so cold. The goosebumps. My hair stands on edge.
Yeah.
But I've got to call a little bit of fraud. I've been on 100 and probably 50 different trails.
Mm-hmm.
And other than, as a child, watching a movie called Harry and the Hendersons, I've never seen Sasquatch. And I'm upset about it. That is fraud because I'm out there every week.
Yeah.
Help me understand that, because maybe I'm not looking in the right places. Maybe I'm wearing the wrong deodorant. Like, there's got to be a reason, because I feel it, but I haven't seen it in person.
Well, I'll tell you, anytime you're going to be out, anytime you're outside, you're alone, it's dark. There are natural reasons why you're a little on edge, why you're a little pensive. You get into like, for instance, if you're hunting. I used to love hunting. I mean, it was every fall. This time of year going into fall, this was one of the most exciting times of year because you're getting ready for hunting season, and it was just wonderful. But I've had to walk through graveyards before to get to my hunting destination in the woods. It's terrifying. I don't care what anybody says. You're loaded. I bow hunt, so you have your bow, maybe a sidearm, and you're going through a graveyard into the woods, and you hear all these noises. And a lot of that's because we don't spend our lives in the woods, walking through the woods. But not really. I mean, we go out there for hunting, we go out there for recreation, but we live in the comfort of a home. We live in the comfort around other people and feeling safe. But in the woods, you feel pensive, and all of a sudden your eyes start playing tricks on you. You start seeing things, and of course you hear the stories, which puts ideas in your head. I've never seen Bigfoot. I do know some people who claim to have seen something, but the more that I'm in the woods, the less, it's not that the less special it is. I love being in nature. I absolutely love it. But especially with satellite imagery and all the things that we have at our disposal, it's becoming more and more difficult for me to even take the subject seriously without kind of laughing and going, "Oh, come on, don't be so gullible." That kind of, especially there in your neck of the woods, around not Watts Bar, but I think, well, maybe it is Watts Bar. It's up 27, a few miles there. Watts Bar being one of them, but at that location there, the Oak Ridge facility, the stories and the rumors that come out of Oak Ridge, it's just hysterical because you are kind of out in the middle of nowhere there. I think it's called the Roosevelt Recreation Area.
Yeah.
You're in the middle of nowhere, and there were even rumors about an underground tunnel where submarines during World War II went from there in Tennessee out to the ocean. And people really believe that kind of stuff. Of course, watch that one be true. But people actually really, I mean, they spent their whole lives. I think there probably is a spiritual application where people project their internal struggles and whatnot into nature. In other words, they may be going through something emotionally, mental health, or whatever, and they're projecting those things, into their environment around. Mentally, they're seeing things that's not there. So there's a mental health aspect to it as well. But yeah, I'm not buying it, Toby. I'm just not buying it. Maybe it's the same thing with me. Maybe it's the deodorant, the aftershave, whatever. But I've just never seen Bigfoot. Never even smelled a Bigfoot or seen a Bigfoot. Whatever. Never, not once.
You mentioned satellite images. I'm in East Tennessee and you're in Virginia. I've come across moonshine stills before. They haven't caught those guys on satellites.
No, they haven't. But are they looking?
That's what the question for tonight is. Are they looking?
The government can't seem to hide anything. I can't, a government that can't balance its budget, it's hard for me to imagine that they could do something as responsible as locate, a pair of shoes under the bed, much less find some tall walking thing or entity through the woods and go, oh, we found it. And if they did find something like that and they tucked it away somewhere to do research, what would be the purpose in that? And surely out of all the people who would be a part of this research, nobody's going to come forward and say, this is what happened. Here's my evidence. This is the proof that I have. Nobody after all these years. I'm just not buying it. And I know a lot of people believe in Bigfoot. A lot of people believe in these things. But the problem that I have is the concept of believing in something. Now, maybe if belief is, if we take belief and we just trap it inside of our mind, thinking, I'm thinking about this subject, and we call that belief. Okay, then I can buy the idea of people believing in something like this. But belief, as far as evidence is concerned, and actually doing something about it, doing something involved with it, it's not there. So people say they believe in it, but what they really mean is they've got an active imagination and they want it to be true. They want that to be true, like somebody would want Star Trek to happen, or Star Wars for that matter, and wield a lightsaber and use the Force. They want that. Their imagination is fueled. But the idea of believing in something, like you would believe in democracy or the Constitution, or believe that 2 + 2 is 4 most of the time, then I think people are just projecting their imagination. That's what I think about Bigfoot in general. UFOs, not so much, because there's a different thing going on with UFOs. But with Bigfoot, I think it's just playing on the old haunted house trope,
What about the plaster cast? How can you argue with plaster cast? I've seen them. You've seen them. You talked to a Bigfoot expert on
Matt Sieber, who really is. And again, I don't have permission to share some of his specific thoughts, because if you talk to Matt, first of all, if there's an expert out there on all of the Bigfoot folklore, Matt Sieber, EastTennesseeBigfoot.org, the guy's an expert. He knows. He's been on the Bigfoot television shows. But he has some different opinions and nuance about what he thinks that's not necessarily mainstream. But I'll let him share that. But plaster can be faked. Plaster can be faked. And man, if you're walking through the woods, there's all kinds of shapes and trees that are twisted certain ways, and the way the landscape looks. You can make what's that term? It starts with a P, and I always forget the term when it's time to talk about it. But it makes your eyes, you're trying so hard to make a shape into something that your brain says, okay, it's like looking at the clouds. You'll see the clouds and you'll see Snoopy in the clouds, or see Elvis in the clouds. You'll see these different shapes that give you the idea that there's a house, there's this, and it's your brain trying to make sense of the shape that it's seeing. And that happens in the woods all the time. So you're walking, you're looking at the ground. It looks like a Bigfoot. You pour plaster into these little indentions in the ground. You're like, hey, here's a Bigfoot, But I'm not buying that it's an actual foot. It's not buying it.
I mean, maybe the P word you were looking for was psychedelic.
Nope. I cannot think of the word right now.
Don't follow my train of thought here, though. A lot of the Bigfoot sightings are the 1960s. LSD was a big deal back then. True.
I don't think there's a correlation though between the psychedelic movement of the 60s, and I would say that some people have gotten a hold of some bad mushrooms before, and probably seen Bigfoot and all kinds of things. But I think most of the stuff that people, even when it comes to hauntings and ghosts, it's their minds playing tricks on them. You have thoughts that are inserted by folklore. Folklore will continue, you're bombarded with that from television and specials. And once there's that feeling of validation of, I know I saw something, because you're not in the woods that often. Here's a great example. In the 1950s, with the big UFO craze, huge UFO craze.
Mhm.
And it was popular, and it was being fueled by Hollywood. Hollywood was kind of pushing it just a little bit. Well, what was going on in the 50s? We were just starting a space race. We were just starting to this competition with the Soviet Union. And we were building jets as fast as we could build them. People were hearing sonic booms for the first time. Our skies were exploding with jets. And people in rural America had never seen jets, never heard sonic booms. So what do you got? You got UFOs. They're everywhere. And the same thing with Bigfoot. Once you get the television shows, the YouTube, all this other stuff, then sightings start increasing. You're talking about being, a lot of the Bigfoot sightings were in the 60s, but we're actually in a Bigfoot craze right now.
Yeah.
Right now, I mean, it dominates popular opinion. People are all the time, they're saying, Bill, you got to do a video on YouTube, or got to do a Bigfoot video on YouTube. You got to do a video about this. I'm like, that's not really what our channel does. So Carolyn has a joke. Every time we go somewhere in the mountains, there's always a statue of Bigfoot, which is weird. But there's, you'll be at a ski resort, snowshoe ski resort in West Virginia. There's a Bigfoot, everywhere. So I'm always videoing it. So people, I think, have assumed sometimes that I'm a Bigfoot guy. And it's like, well, no, not really at all. But it's just fascinating of how many people are into Bigfoot, or air quotes here, believe in Bigfoot.
There's one in downtown Chattanooga right now on the Hunter Museum steps. So we got a couple quick comments. Someone says, "Word up, William." Who is it? Guy have truck. Do you know who that is? I forgot your real name, but you're on a lot of.
Oh, that's Billy. That's Billy.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Billy. And Tommy says, "Don't blame Squatch on the hippies."
Don't blame Squatch on Word.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Billy's a great example.
Yes, Billy.
William Wallace. Billy's another good example of he's in the woods all the time.
Yeah.
And we've been hiking all over the state and West Virginia. If you're going to see Bigfoot, it's going to be in West Virginia. I mean, I'm shocked still at how just in the middle of nowhere some of those locations are in West Virginia. And yet, you see bear. You see a lot of bear. I think a lot of people, especially that they're not from the country, they don't live out in the mountains. They don't live, out in the middle of nowhere. Or they don't hunt. They're not. They see bear in a zoo. So then they take that hiking trip in the summer, and they go hiking and they see a bear walking on two legs, which they do all the time. Bear walk on their hind legs all the time. And you see it through the woods and you go, oh, there's Sasquatch. And then all of a sudden the bear comes back down on four, but it's through the woods, and you're like, and then he disappeared. It's like, no, you saw a bear. But yeah. William, so the paint, we've got the blue paint going on, Toby. You're gonna have to tell everybody what's going on with the blue paint. What's happening here?
The blue paint. Of course, it's a reference back to the Picts, which during the time of William Wallace, they didn't really wear blue paint, and most people agree they didn't wear kilts. The Picts drove the Romans out, from what I understand. And they were the wild people. I've seen Hadrian's Wall in North England. The Roman Empire never got to Scotland. They were the wild people. So that's sort of where that comes from. But, I've got my St. Andrew's flag is on top of my American flag here. Needed some color coordination. We're talking about, very serious topics tonight. So we needed to make sure that we lightened it up just a little bit. That's what
Bigfoot's fighting words with people. I mean, they get I've noticed that on the comments during Vlogmas and stuff. You start teasing Bigfoot a little bit or just joking around, and they get defensive, as if they're defending their faith. And that goes back into that concept of belief. What are you really saying you believe in here? That there's an invisible, hairy creature that can't be seen by anybody but a handful of people. But, it's just kind of crazy.
The Romans were feared by our peoples. Yes, they were, Billy. And they should have been. I mean, anybody who can turn around in the sight of full bombardment of artillery, not artillery, but archery, and just give them the full moon, like those are men.
Those are men.
One of them even got shot in an unfortunate spot. So I mean, I saw it in the movie, so it had to happen.
It had to happen.
It had to happen. Well, speaking of our peoples, though, and Bigfoot, Nessie. That's big money
It,
around Loch Ness. My family comes from Loch Lomond. We don't have a prehistoric dinosaur there, but what about Nessie?
it's another one of those things that I'm glad people are making money off of it. I think it's great. I think it's phenomenal. But we have sonar now. You know, I'm sorry because
You said we had satellites too, but are they looking?
a bass boat could drive through Loch Ness and determine at most depths if there's a Loch Ness, if there's a prehistoric dinosaur under there. So Loch Ness went from hiding in this really, really deep lake to magical. Now Loch Ness has to be magical because you have to be able to cover it. You have to be able to cover why it's not showing up on sonar. It's because Loch Ness has magic. And it's just it. At this point, I think you don't hear much about Loch Ness now as much as you did when we were kids. When we were kids, that was a big one, But now it's like, yeah, but my bass boat had sonar, so you should be able, a fish finder should be able to locate Loch Ness with no problem at all. You're driving through there probably at a pretty good speed too, and be able to him light up the radar like nothing. I think that people enjoy the imagination of it, and especially Loch Ness because it seems like a mysterious place anyway. It's like, ooh, it's foggy, it's dark, and you know what though? There's never been a good movie made about the Loch Ness monster. I'm just saying. Have you ever seen a good movie made about? I don't think we ever. Bigfoot, Harry and the Hendersons, which I'm not a fan of. Carolyn loves that movie. I
love Harry and the Hendersons. Maybe it was just the stage.
I've just never been a big fan.
Well, I mean, in Scotland, it's cold and dark most of the year. Lots of rain. They like their drink. So going back to kind of the LSD psychedelic thing, I mean, you've got to have something to talk about when you're huddled around the fire at night.
Yeah, you get a few beers in you. You get some liquor in you.
Beers.
Yeah, Elvis and
everything. Don't drink beer.
Whatever
they drink. I'm sure they, make up stories about fun stuff, right?
They're laughing. They're seeing something, so they're drinking something out there. They're just not going to buy it. I think there are things to be scared of about all of these myths, but it's not the actual myth itself. There are things. Sometimes it's a huge distraction from other things. Bigfoot's probably the least harmless of some of these myths. Loch Ness, like I said, I don't hear much about Loch Ness anymore. I mean, have you heard anything about the Loch Ness?
I think Nessie got beamed up by a UFO about a decade ago before sonar technology became really good, before it was available at a lower cost to the masses. So a UFO of some kind removed Nessie. I don't know if they kept her or not, but that's what happened. I mean, we lose cattle here. Bigfoot, he's like a sleuth. He stays out from the canopies. So our sonar, radar, satellites, all this stuff you're talking about, Russians, I don't know who's looking for Bigfoot, but he's elusive. But Nessie, she was in one lot. It's a big one, but I don't think they had trouble finding her. So haven't heard anything in years, and I'm pretty sure that's what happened.
I will throw a curveball. This is a crazy curveball. Is I've seen a cattle mutilation there in Saudi Daisy, or at least technically it's Hickson, but on the way to Saudi Daisy on Middle Valley Road. That pasture there in Middle Valley belongs to my stepdad, my mom.
Mm-hmm.
And we, on a few occasions, there would be either a younger cow laid on its side, and without getting too gruesome, the strangeness of the situation, how it's cut open a certain way, and it fit the billing of what you see on TV. And nobody, but here was the weird stuff about it is my mom's husband's father, my grandfather on, mom's family on that side, he didn't make a big deal out of it. Neither did Dennis, neither did mom. It was like, that's one of those things that happen, what things, like, what do you mean that happened? Like, so is it coyote? No, it's not coyotes. This looks like this. Well, then what is this? I don't know. It's just one of them things. What thing? I have no idea. Is it cult? Is it, I've questioned, is it a cult? Is it, what? And it happened, I don't know, 3 times, if I'm not mistaken. And then, we'd take the backhoe out there and bury the cow. But just wondering what, I can't explain it. I have no idea, but it was the precision the precision of the incision, it sliced a certain way. It wasn't like tore to pieces or anything like you would think a pack of coyotes would do. A little ferocious for coyotes too. I mean, you know what I mean? It's just kind of a strange, can't explain. And it's right there in Saudi Daisy. It's like, but right in the middle of everything. They don't raise cows now. And of course, I was teasing, Dennis, and I kept telling him, I said, it's because of those mutilations, isn't it? That's why you've stopped it. I can't explain that.
Well, but, I mean, if it were aliens, they probably have stealth technology, right? We got it from them. So they could sit down right in the middle valley and do an autopsy or experimentation on a cow. And
what's the purpose of it? Like, let's say it's an alien. What are they doing? If it was, they flew down in their ships to Saudi Daisy, and just for this, this one type of cow, how did that work out?
Saudi Daisy cattle and Middle Valley cattle, most people don't know, is an offshoot of Saudi Daisy cattle. But Saudi Daisy cattle is the more purebred. So Saudi and Daisy merged in 1969, and that there's a lot of stories on why, but really it's because they had a Saudi bull and a Daisy cow, and they bred the perfect piece of cattle.
Are you serious right now? Because
Middle Valley cattle are an offshoot of that. So they're not a purebred.
It's in the middle.
They're a blend. They're like a mutt if they were a dog, but they're a cow.
I was totally buying this story.
So why would they not want to dissect 1 degree away from the perfect cattle? I mean, the Saudi Daisy Police Department is very vigilant about protecting the Saudi Daisy cattle because we're world known about that. Black Angus has nothing on Saudi Daisy cows. They're the best. So if I was going to take on Saudi Daisy Police versus the Middle Valley, Hamilton County sheriffs not being quite as vigilant, and I love our sheriff's department, I love our police department, but you got to think, like, what's the path of least resistance? And I would want to dissect a Middle Valley cow. That's the way I think about things. Tell me I'm wrong.
I didn't even know what you're talking about, the Saudi Daisy cattle thing. I had no idea that was I'm like, huh? I know about Saudi Daisy being in 2 different towns at one point. And of course, people outside are like, what are you talking about? Because they're both tiny. And when I first moved there, I remember hearing the
some
story.
towns are bigger than others.
Yeah. I mean, I remember back when it used to take 2 hours to get from Cleveland to Saudi Daisy. You had to take a ferry across. You had to literally, it's a magical ferry. Yeah, it's magical. You had to get on it and flew over anyway. It was insane. Amazing. I don't have a theory on I don't have one. I mean, I kept thinking maybe there's something to, again, I thought maybe it could be occultic, but there was no other signs of people being there. It was just, they would just essentially dead cow, cut open, that simple. And never did quite understand it. But we want explanations, right?
Yes.
If you've never seen a tornado, especially in the mountains, you don't see tornadoes that often, but when they do happen, it's kind of devastating. On Lewis Chapel, not far from Saudi Daisy, up on 111, got to, we had fishing ponds up there, and got up to the top of the mountain, and I thought somebody had some serious vandalism, like the tops of the trees had been cut out. I thought UFO. Really? I didn't know. Yeah, I had no idea. And it was a tornado. A tornado touched down and just ripped the forest up there apart. But I'd never seen that before. And so if you don't have a background on anything, in other words, you've never watched videos about the damage of a tornado, and you walk into that situation, your imagination is going to try to give you an explanation on what you're seeing. But it didn't take long, maybe 2 minutes to go, oh, this is a tornado. Our little fishing trailer that we had set up there had been thrown way across the property. I mean, it was a serious, it looked awful.
Or was it a tornado?
What's that?
Was it a tornado?
Yeah, it was a tornado. It was definitely a tornado. It had taken out all kinds of stuff. And it kind of did a touch and go all across the mountain there around Lewis Chapel. But at a glance, I wasn't there during, the tornado. I didn't know. I mean, the last time I'd been to the mountain at that point, probably been a couple of months or something. So the last time I was there, everything was fine. So immediately when you see this, your brain starts, at the speed of light, trying to give it an explanation. It's a UFO. It took about another split second to go, no, that's a tornado. Of course, I'm being facetious about thinking it was a UFO, but I didn't have an explanation. I thought it was vandalism, at first, because I just saw the trailer, and then all of a sudden I started putting it together with the trees and I looked at the neighbors way down the road. Their barn was gone. You start, oh, okay, this makes sense. This suddenly makes sense. And
Okay.
I think a lot of it, UFOs are kind of the same bird, same creature. And both of them, if you're not used to looking at the night sky, and when the UFO craze was going on in the 50s, all of a sudden people started looking at the stars more. They started buying telescopes and wanting to find these.
Ah.
So they all start going out looking at, at night, and they start seeing things they've never seen before. Shooting stars, different colors of shooting stars. It's like, yeah, that's always been there. But if you've never made the observation, you wouldn't know that it's there. And so a lot of the early UFO reports were just natural phenomena. Some weren't. Some were. There were some different things going on. And again, aircraft and whatnot. We're seeing that right now too. There's another UFO craze, but this time there's something different, Toby, and that is fascinating me. And that's that the government is starting to acknowledge this phenomenon, and that's weird.
Distraction. Look over here. What's going on down here? You don't know.
I'm convinced that it's. Without a doubt, I don't believe in intelligent life on other planets, and that's a bias. And I'll be honest.
Do you believe in intelligent life on this planet? Let's start with that.
It's debatable.
We got to set that foundation first.
Sometimes I definitely have to leave my own headspace to find it. but I think it's. If it was just a well-coordinated distraction, that would be, I could see any government using UFOs to justify, claiming certain things. It was predicted about 15 or 20 years ago that we were going to do what ufologists call light disclosure or gradual disclosure. And that's when that was the first time, as close to as before YouTube, when I'd come across websites or whatever, and I'd go, I get why ufologists would say gradual. It's because there's this weird, silly theory out there that says that gradual, the world can't handle UFOs. It would shake us to our core, and I'm like, no, it wouldn't. No. People have believed in flying things, and dude, I'm a Christian. I believe in the resurrection of Christ. So the idea that things fly is fine with me, because I believe, in the word of God, true belief, which means there's actions that line up with what I'm believe. You can't believe in something where you can't put action with it, right?
Right.
But in this case, it seems to me that we use propaganda a lot to fight wars. And we have two rival nations right now that it feels sometimes right now like we're on the brink of war all the time with these other rival nations. And one of the best ways to saber rattle is to pretend that you have something that maybe you do or maybe you don't. Or maybe a passive threat. And so suddenly we have these things now verified by pilots, which we've now determined are expert observers. That's their definition. They are an expert observer.
Wow.
This is better than the average observer because they have two eyes. No, because they've trained as if a hunter has any less developed eyes than a pilot. No, but we call them an expert, right? We call them an expert. And it's naval fighter pilots who are seeing these things and reporting these things. And a lot of people say, see, that adds that's verification. And I'm like, and again, I mean nothing personal at all to these young men, young women who've seen these things. I don't mean anything personal. I'm not trying to insult their character, but it wouldn't be the first time that any government has used a government employee to help spread propaganda. It wouldn't be the first time. We've been doing this since time immemorial. We've done this for the past thousands and thousands of years. So it wouldn't be new for a government employee that they've spent millions and millions of dollars training for CIA or whoever to look at them and say, listen, we need you to help perpetuate this concept. You saw this. And the reason why is because we want to make sure China stays at bay, or China stays friendly, or Russia stays friendly. And for all we know, that some of their propaganda is very similar to that. Here's what we do know is that we tend to report a lot more UFO activity than, let's say, Russia. It's not that Russia never talks about UFOs. Occasionally they talk about UFOs, especially during World War II and in the decade following. But for the same reasons why we do. A lot of the reasons where people were just starting to look into space at night, actively searching for them. And so that perpetuates this rumor constantly. And so that means more people are looking in space. But between China's militarism in the past 20 years, Russia's increasing militarism, we are motivated to have a propaganda machine that kind of makes us a little more might make us a little more feared than otherwise. So it's a passive. Tom McDaniel said, especially in the South, that makes it a little more passive, if you would. I agree,
Yeah.
man.
Well,
I agree.
I know Tommy. He has a drone too, and it's occurred to me that some of this UFO activity could be
Oh yeah.
unidentified flying objects. That are drones. I don't know.
Once you've seen drones a lot, I will say this: the footage that's been released from the Pentagon, and you know, where they're admitting they don't know what it is, and if you keep up with this with the whole UFO bit, it's continually in circulation. These 4 videos are continually right now in circulation because we just don't know what it is. It's not a traditional the kind of drone you're going to go down here and buy, get at Best Buy or whatever. It's not. It's definitely not that kind of drone. They talked about hypersonic drones.
Whoa.
You know, that's. But again, there's a lot of physics issues with these things. You know, they're not supposed to be I always pronounce his name wrong. Michio Kaku, is that his name?
Yeah.
The physicist. He's always, you know, I call them Brian Greene. They tour together. You know, they're celebrity physicists, right? And when they're sitting there saying that we can't explain these, we don't know what these things are, that it can't be a hypersonic drone because you can't get a hypersonic drone to do this. That's when I go back to it and say, you're telling me that the United States government is letting something fly over our skies. The sovereignty of our country is supposed to be important to us. Why haven't we shot them down yet? And of course, Roswell enters the chat right when you say that.
All right. Yeah.
Maybe we have before. And again, I just don't. It's not so much that I don't trust the government. It's people in general that they're going to do what they can to make a profit. And so let's say the government did cover something up with the Roswell thing. They covered it up. There's going to be somebody that's going to leave the government and go start a business. and somebody's going to try to get rich off this. You know, if there is some type of device that can perform the way the screen is telling us that it's performing. I just don't know that we should believe everything or most of the things that we see. I learned to use green screen with my YouTube channel. You know, it was the greatest moment ever because then I had aliens and this, and it was so fun. And so during 2019, I don't know how I incorporated green screens into everything, like overdid it just because of how much fun that I was having with it. But it did teach me something, man. You can make anybody believe anything with green screens. You know.
Yeah. And well, let's talk about that because artificial intelligence is huge, and deepfakes are a substantial threat right now to national security, to corporate America, to everybody. So, you know, it's no longer, blessed are you who have faith and haven't seen. You can also see it.
Yeah.
You can't believe it.
Wow. And man, you talk about the discussion of conspiracies. I don't even think we've scratched the surface again on what I said earlier about the real conspiracies, the real things I'm worried the least about Bigfoot, the least about aliens using the globe as a rest area. We're on our way somewhere, or maybe it's their vacation destination. I don't know. Those are the type of things that they talk. And I can't remember the name of the YouTuber right now, or I would probably plug his channel, but big channel, but he does deep fakes of Tom Cruise. That's his thing.
Wow.
It is hysterical. It's comedy stuff.
Yeah.
It's hysterical because they've nailed this, man. I mean, he looks like Tom Cruise, smile and all. And so they have him in these ridiculous things being Tom Cruise. But he's got the laugh down and everything. And so you could really cause some severe problems, let's say with the political climate that we're in right now, where we're so very divided. So how diabolical does a party or does a group have to be before an accusation is made on a political figure, and using deep fake technology and better be able to make an accusation against a president, a former president, or whoever, just for a political purpose, for a political end? How close are we to that? Has it been considered already? Has it happened already? Those are the kind of things that and I don't know how to legislate against. Like, how do you prevent that? I've got nothing unless you engage into Orwellian tactics to screen all media, screen all YouTube kind of stuff, Twitter, all that junk.
The only way to do it is to turn the machines against the machines. You have to build your own better AI. But then we get into almost a Terminator nightmare scenario.
Well, what you're suggesting is a Cold War of AI.
Yeah.
Wow, I've never thought about that. That's insane. Where the wars are fought, the nerds have taken over with
the wars are fought in the cyber world
Yeah.
primarily now, outside of Eastern Europe and that situation, which we never thought we would see that in the 21st century. It's all cyber war. And I think there's a lot of this going on, the artificial intelligence and the deep fakes and all this. I think it can be weaponized against other countries even. Probably some of the coups or some of the things that go on. I mean, I wouldn't, say Americans are the most sophisticated if you look at our social media post or our popular media, but you think about countries who don't have the same electronic access we do, how much easier it would be to influence that populace. It's very frightening.
It
already exists.
I look at somebody like Elon Musk, who I got to admit, I'm a fanboy. I am. I admire him. I just think, I think he's done more. I've always been a NASA fan, always. I've defended NASA with friends of ours, friends that we have in, mutual friends, where, I was, go moon, go there, go, let's go to Mars, well, all this stuff. But I've watched Elon Musk sort of prove some of their philosophies right about where our adventures in space, our space technology, the science in space might be better off in private hands.
Yeah.
And he is proving that. He's proven me wrong, because I was always like the traditional statement that it takes a government to get to the moon. The government has to rally us. And wow, watching him, I know, because for me to, I know. Right?
Have we switched positions? Do I need to change the left to the right and the right to the left on the screens here so I know who's who?
I think it has to do with me moving to Virginia and seeing what it's like with 38% of the state working for the government. There's a change of where you're like, wait a minute, there's some. So it's made me more of a conservative. That's true. Watching Elon Musk, his progress, but when he said he was terrified of AI. I was like, huh? And so, I start Googling, like, what is he talking? Wouldn't AI be cool? You can have conversations with your coffee pot. That would be wonderful. You can sing 4-part harmony with all of the, appliances in your kitchen, and then auto-tune your voice so that it's in tune. That would be great. But now that I understand what AI is, that is terrifying. And what you're suggesting is just imagine the fast food war. But it's control for your attention, control for your time, and control for the narrative, and just getting smarter and smarter exponentially. That is terrifying. I don't know how to. I don't even have the foggiest idea except to unplug altogether and just basically be that person that says, I'm not going to be on the internet. I'm not going to consume any information. There for a while, living off the grid was so popular. It was trending back in 15 and 16 during that time period.
Yeah, it was.
And they put a stop to most of that. The government has. It's kind of weird, but not that I'd ever want to live off the grid. That's the thing. If you're kind of worried about aliens and a Bigfoot or whatever, don't live off the grid. Last time you and I went hiking, we talked briefly about this over at Spruce Knob in West Virginia. It's like, man, if you break down out here, we were on that one road, and Billy and I went recently on our way out there to that cave. And if you break down out there, you're going to be out there maybe 8 to 24 hours and not see anybody on that one road on the backside of Spruce Knob. You're not. I don't think we passed a car until we got there. I know Carolyn and I did, and until we got there, then we saw I think 2 cars the whole time we were back there. So if I'm going to see an alien, a Bigfoot, or one of those government SUVs that are always painted black for some reason, I mean, the government, why do they not have other colors? Is that the only color they have? What's going on there?
It's cheaper. They take all the odd pieces of the colors, the buckets, and they mix it all together. So
Is
it's conservation. That's why they're
that,
all black.
is this one of those cow things where I'm like, what?
Yeah. So Walter, thanks for joining us. You missed the story of the Saudi Daisy cow. We talked about that. That was new to Bill. So go back and watch it later. We got some more things coming though. But yeah, that the government SUVs. I don't know. I see those all the time. I think they have more of a vehicle budget than I do because I'm also out in places a lot of times that are very remote, and I
Yeah.
have no cell signal. And people think I'm crazy. Maybe I am. Um, let's see. Tommy says, according to somebody, aliens have been around since the biblical days. Could have been. Could have been. You mentioned Star Trek earlier, Bill. I'm a big Star Trek fan. I know it's hard to believe a guy who puts paint on his face and starts a YouTube channel would be interested in science fiction and other things that people might consider on the more nerdy side, I guess, if you will. But I love Star Trek, and Nicole Nichols, we lost her a couple weeks ago, so that really made me cry. But let's talk about if I were out in the middle of absolute nowhere, had no cell signal, couldn't use all my artificial intelligence, and there were no black government jeeps, and Sasquatch didn't show up, and I needed to get from point A to point B, but I was injured. Would a transporter be feasible? So back it up a minute. Gene Roddenberry, who invented Star Trek, was revolutionary. He come up with all these sci-fi ideas, and you'll see a lot of things that we use today and have used since the 90s that came from his imagination. But that was just because they couldn't afford to do a bunch of shuttlecraft shots. But now we have that. I read an article. We have transporters. It's a thing. And this is an outdoor channel, so I'm trying to think about how that could be useful to me instead of driving 2 or 3 hours to a waterfall to just step into my transporter pad and get there.
I think,
is that it? Am I close to where we're coming on that? Is that coming to a home near you?
No. It's not. What they've transported is essentially is a particle. The way I've understood it, it's a particle, and it's more of and again, if there's a physicist, please forgive me if you're watching for the butchering of this, but it's an entangled particle essentially, and whether it's being transported, that's the debate. Is that transportation? Is that being transported or not? And let's say that they were able to break all of your
particles into particles.
We're particles, and then you send it to the other location. So we're at one pad, and it launches us to another pad by breaking our particles down and sending us in an array of energy. Well, that means that you're killing this, right? Or does it? I mean, that's the debate right now. That means that this is being destroyed and reassembled. So then, is that other entity you? Right? Is it you?
It's at least a perfect copy.
But is that copy? Is it you? And so I argue pish posh on the whole concept.
You dream killer.
I love Star Trek too. I think Star Trek. What I loved about Star Trek were the characters more than anything. As I've gotten older, I've recognized that.
Sure.
Some of the science, some of the fiction behind it is lofty minded. It's perfect world minded, and that's why the modern Star Treks are criticized, is because it has a very negative viewpoint of the future, very dark viewpoint of the future. Whereas the old Star Treks, and old, I'm calling generations old too, because we're old now, but
80s, sure.
Or Deep Space Nine, or Voyager, which I really fell in love with later. I appreciated Voyager later. When it was out, I wasn't that impressed, but then later I was like, wow, this is really good. Yeah. But I'm calling all of that old Star Trek compared to this new stuff. I liked Abrams' take on Star Trek a great deal. I thought his first movie, his reboot, I actually liked that. But these series that they have out now are dark, and they're
now the brand new one isn't. Strange New Worlds is a prequel to Kirk.
Do you like it?
It's Trek. It's Trek again.
Okay.
All the stuff between old Trek and Strange New Worlds, I'm not a fan of the pessimistic view of the future.
I haven't watched it yet. Now, my personal viewpoint of the future is kind of bleak. But that's the whole thing, is I'm not watching Star Trek to project my own vision of the future. I'm actually trying to avoid, it's a distraction. That's what television is supposed to be anyway. And so with a lot of Star Trek, it's kind of the newer stuff. I wouldn't say I haven't watched Strange New Worlds yet, so I'll give it that. But I tried to watch Picard and whatever that other series was.
Yeah, I couldn't do that one. Sorry, Discovery is I can't. Maybe someday.
It was just strange, but
the captain cried in every episode just about.
Yeah, it was.
They can't handle drama on TV. There's enough drama in real life. You want escapism in television. In my opinion.
Warp drive was a biological entity that like shot spores out. It was like it was just insane. It was just a real kind of nutty, weird thing. But I'll give it this is that the imagination behind, a lot of this, Gene Roddenberry, the ideas that he came up with, that his writers came up with are, man, we've almost accomplished some of that stuff. But I don't think
most of it.
What's that?
Most of it, not all. The communicators, flip phones from the 90s.
Right.
iPads.
Sure.
You and I talking just like we are now. That was
pure Star Trek. Well, you could also say the Jetsons. By the way, George Jetson, if I'm not mistaken, was born this year. If I'm not mistaken.
Wow.
You'd have to look that one up to get a specific, but he was born this year. That's kind of because
it is. We're already 7 years past Marty McFly's future.
Right.
And I don't have a flying car yet, and I'm really upset about it.
The screen.
I think that's the oil companies keeping us from having flying cars personally.
If the here's the thing too, where everybody preached this for years. Am I right? Oil company keeping us down.
Keeping us down. I mean, we have transporters without them too. So we need to talk about this.
The oil companies, my whole life, have been accused of everything. I'm serious.
Big corporations.
They're evil.
Yeah.
Evil. The legislation that was just passed. And again, I don't want to get political. No. I mean, unless we need to. Yeah. But if oil companies had any power at all, we wouldn't even hear about global warming. We wouldn't hear about any of these things unless, and what I've decided in my head anyway, and again, this is sort of like Bigfoot belief, where it's just me, in my head projecting, my own doubt in certain areas or whatever, is that either the oil companies have just become so smart that they're actually backing some of this stuff because, it's going to take fossil fuels to fuel everyone's electric car. That maybe oil companies, maybe they're smarter than I give them credit, but I don't think they have nearly as much power as they've been accused. I don't think they're keeping any technology down. I know that there's the conspiracy that we had, hydrogen cars.
Propane.
What's that?
Propane cars.
No, hydrogen cars where you can break down water. They basically run on water, and you input water and you get oxygen comes out or something like that. I think it's the silliest thing I've ever heard is that you could actually suppress something like that. You might be able to keep one guy down, that's invented this in his garage and he tries to sell it and they kill him, they take it out and they take the plans and nobody ever knows that we could have free energy or whatever, 0 point energy. I think some people call that other pipe dream. And it's like, you could keep one guy down, but you can't keep a society down. And we're all pretty much educated close. I mean, you go through high school, you go through junior high. We have a lot of people getting higher education more now than ever. You're not going to keep everyone down on that invention. It's going to pop up in multiple places, not just one. So I don't think the oil companies have that much power. I just don't. I think they have a lot of money, but I don't think they have enough power to keep down that kind of a technology. You might a few times, but it's going to bubble up here and there and everywhere. It's more likely they would buy it and sell it. That's what's likely. Like I said, I've become quite the conservative when it comes to some of this stuff. The more you look into it, the more you just see active imaginations and people wishing for something better and a better situation. And they want to blame something. I want to blame it's the government's keeping us down. So it's the government's fault. It's big corporations' fault, and so you're always blaming somebody else for your own situation. Yeah. That's my take on it. Is that too conservative? Well, I've probably made everybody mad.
Yeah, that's, personal accountability, whatever. Maybe it's overrated. But something we don't know about the Saudi Daisy cow or you don't know, I haven't told you yet, that relates to this very topic. I'm glad you brought up big oil and we're talking about it because the methane produced from the Saudi Daisy cow, and you know where methane comes from on cows. I'm not going to say it because this is a family channel, but it comes from not their mouth. It comes from the other end. is such a pure source of fuel. It would completely eliminate the need for fossil fuel if that wasn't held under wraps. One drop would send the entire, Pacific fleet on for at least 2 years of satiate bovine methane. You didn't know that. You learned it tonight.
No, I didn't. I didn't know. I think what keeps. Well, I'm thinking.
You lived here for how long?
I lived there for. See, Mom lived there for I did. So 17 years, 18 years, something like that.
See, so secrets can be held. You should have known these things, and you don't know them. And I'm letting you and all the viewers know tonight on the live stream, and we'll put this back on subsequent cast as well, because this information is important, and people need to know the truth about the matter.
I was sitting here, you're talking about the cows and being able to fuel things with flatulence, and
that's a PG word.
It's hard to spell, but I think we are living in a time of fake news, and that can shape. It's becoming in vogue to talk about the environment. It's not becoming in vogue. It's been in vogue for a while to talk about environmental impacts, and it's really, one would think that if we had, let's talk about transporter technology. If we had any of these technologies, that we would be able to live better and live healthier. I mean, we could go on and on. You could eliminate shipping altogether if you had if you had a hyperloop, any type of hyperloop, any type of fast transportation that reduced, it'd be wonderful. But it's funny that what we're experiencing right now, what we're hearing right now is, instead of allocating all of our sources there, it's the reduction of the average person's lifestyle. We're trying to eliminate eating meat altogether for eating cockroaches and crickets and whatnot. But crickets, I mean, that is a big push right now. It's not a conspiracy. There's articles about it all the time, because there's a huge push there. Reduction of beef and increase in, they're calling it offering more of a variety of food. And I'm like, what a joke. What a joke. So if we were on the cutting edge of some of this stuff, there's more money to be made. I do think there is a power shift, though. There's definitely a power shift in some of these things. You were talking about AI. I think a lot of these things, they're behind the scenes. There are power shifts, we'll say, but I think they use our emotions against us sometimes. And so when we have those, the hill will die on, I know there are UFOs, I know there's a Bigfoot, those passions that we have, that the government's hiding something. I think a lot of times we're being manipulated with those beliefs. And of course, the algorithm makes that possible too, because you can go down the rabbit hole, starting at, I won't mention the date, but everybody knows what I'm talking about. Tragic dates in our recent history.
Yeah.
And you'll go down the rabbit hole, and all of a sudden you'll think your neighbor is behind something, or the guy down the road. And it fuels our paranoia instead of paying attention to what's right in front of us right now.
Wow.
And that's the bad part about the conspiracies, man. And I love it. When YouTube first came out, first 7 years, I guess, of YouTube, I loved YouTube conspiracies. These guys, average guys, younger than me, in their 30s, they could edit, and I could barely work my phone, much less edit back then. And they told these wonderful stories, but they had a documentary kind of feel to them, and they were really good storytellers, and they had an outlet to tell stories. And they learned the hook quickly, is make it close to home, make it close to where you can identify with those dates. You can identify with that situation. You've been curious about UFOs, but you're tired of what television gives you. And somebody that might at least pretend to take the content seriously. Wow, it was better than television. It was wonderful as far as imagination is concerned. But I think at this point it's been weaponized. And at this point it's been it's controlled. And we know it's not that I don't look at YouTube and go, they're trying to suppress information. No, I think YouTube's just trying to give people, whether it's a power group or whether it's just to make money, they're giving people what they want, but they want to make sure that the message is the message that they want to present. But that would be any government, any corporation. You want to put your beliefs out there, your ideology out there. And I think the safest way to do that is with expert, witnesses, expert people that are expert observers, right?
Just we're experts on satiate bovine, and
I
don't know what you're the expert on, actually, Bill. but something, I'm sure.
Something. I'm, I'm,
Something.
I'm in there somewhere.
You'll be an expert someday in something.
Oh,
So
yeah.
with these conspiracy theories and the things that we're talking about, are you saying that going back to say the credit collection days, or with banks, or some of these news outlets or things, if you can make people angry or afraid, you get their attention. Is that where we've come to with these?
I think when you become an adult, you're really more worried about your fear. It comes from, legacy and extending your life past yourself, right?
Yeah.
And so any type of thing that threatens to leave a legacy or whatever, that's your knee jerk reaction.
Oh,
And so that's because we're not afraid of the dark anymore, right? You're not supposed to be anyway. So
right.
I think that things that change in status, things that threaten to change what we perceive as the norm, that's the knee jerk reaction. So I think there's money to be made there, as far as people getting the response from people.
Yeah.
We're also scared of things that don't look like us.
Right.
And so if we're exposed to certain things I mean, this is especially in the church world, you're terrified of leaving your culture, to listen to a different type of music within even your own belief system. Like this music has some type of superior spiritual quality than
Oh,
this music that has the same content. But we're like that when we consume media. We'll isolate ourselves from things that are different or challenging. You've never been exposed to it, so you immediately put a bad judgment on it. So I think we're afraid of in that sense. But when it comes to whipping up anger, I think we've become experts at that.
bingo.
I think we've become experts. I think that's what the AI is best at. The algorithm on YouTube is brilliant at it. I used to watch both sides of the aisle when it comes to politics. I watched everything. I didn't want to be brainwashed by one political group. I wanted to hear both sides. The algorithm on YouTube will not let me be that way. I have to go in and literally type in specifics sometimes, because if I watch 2 or 3, let's say, conservative videos, that is all you will get. That you will reinforces and reinforces
Yeah.
and reinforces, and never hear a different side, or never hear something somebody else has to say about the same topic that may be important. And so that's how you get situations that, let's say, that happen at the beginning of this year. People hear the same thing again and again and again, and they're radicalized. And they become radicals to a cause that, if you really believed in this cause, you wouldn't do A, B, and C, because it's counterproductive to A, B, and C. You're not going to get your way that way, but you become radicalized because it just becomes something you hear again and again and again. And I think all these social media platforms, it's not that they do it on purpose, it just works. I think we have to take a responsibility as individuals to say, no, I need some objectivity. I need to look at both sides of the situation. I don't need to watch 18 videos about UFOs and then say, I believe. Well, wait a minute. Hold on.
But watch this one over and over.
What's that?
Watch the one we're doing now over and over. Like,
well, you need to watch this one over and over again, and you need to make sure that you hit the like button, for goodness sakes. And you need to share the video also on your favorite social media platform, but you definitely need to share the video.
Yeah.
What I would definitely argue for anybody is to try your best to stay positive about things before jumping to conclusions, especially when it comes to conspiracies. Is look at something and say, wait a minute, before I get mad, before I become afraid of whatever this is, why don't I laugh about it first and say, I don't know, I'm going to check into this. I'm going to check a few more sources.
I firmly believe the older I get, that a lot of the people, whether they're propagating conspiracy theories or hate or politics or whatever, we talked a little bit about this in our last live stream about acting versus authenticity. I don't think a lot of the people who are propagating this actually believe it. They just know how to sell it. And you'll observe that when you catch them in other settings where they're like, is this the exact same person? Because they have a different set of beliefs or different mannerism or different behavior. I think they're acting, and they're selling a product that is a hot commodity, and people, as long as they consume it, it's like, I mean, food. let's talk about that for a few minutes. Junk food is delicious, has no nutritional content, and lifestyle diseases are up exponential, where 60% of people who are adult age right now have a risk of one. Um, is that a conspiracy, or is that just companies making things that we enjoy and they know it's not good for us and we know it's not good for us? And everybody's okay with that.
I don't. It's funny because I think we are at a season where everybody wants to be everybody else's conscious.
Yeah.
We shouldn't sell Twinkies. They're terrible for you. We shouldn't sell, and I'm having to do the no sugar thing at all right now. I can't do any kind of sugar. And I'm supposed to be backing away from carbohydrates. And so it's a pretty big effort for me to not do sugar. But I'm against legislation that would change sugar, right? And the same thing, you can't have sugar or you can't eat meat. But we're in a time where people want to tell everybody else what to do.
But we do sin tax as a society. Look at the cigarette taxes, and now menthols are illegal. And I don't know what the liquor taxes are, but I'm sure they're high.
Well,
so why not a large Coke tax?
Well, it's hypocritical. It is hypocritical. You've got cigarettes that have been taxed, all tobacco products that have been taxed just incredibly, but because why did they justify that? Do you remember why they justified that? I'll tell you.
Save lives, I'm sure.
Because it's affecting other people. It's not just affecting you. It's not just a choice you're making for yourself. It's a choice you're making for somebody else. So you shouldn't smoke in the car because the person beside you is having to inhale the smoke. Okay, but having been diagnosed with diabetes, sugar is affecting my sugar intake, and the way it affects me affects my wife because, well, first of all, it makes it more difficult on her. We'll say if I'm not feeling well at the very lowest level.
Yeah.
But what about the healthcare system in general? What kind of strain that puts on the healthcare? And again, I'm not for legislating morality like that. I'm not. I'm diehard against that. You can't legislate morality. But it does put a strain. And I would argue that, yes, tobacco is a nightmare for our society. It has been awful. But I think sugar is probably right there behind it. I think it's right there with it because of all the things that we've linked to sugar. Or what about inactivity? But where does it end? I think that's my question is where does that end?
Social media.
You didn't do your 45-minute jog, Toby. So we're going to dock your pay because you're contributing to higher healthcare costs. I mean,
right.
when does that end?
I don't know where it ends, but I mean, I think anything can be inherently bad. I think sitting in activity, you mentioned that. Social media has destroyed the mental health of our children for a number of reasons. So do you legislate that? I mean, it's at some point, where is it the parents' responsibility to take the screen away or to, have conversations that are difficult versus that? I mean, this is getting serious, but I was hearing some young people at a local university today while I was waiting for my turn in line, and they were all talking about different resources available for mental health counseling and apps they use, and that's real, but I think the propensity of that to be more real now is dramatically higher because of what the platforms we're talking about today. So there's a lot of good that can come from these platforms, but I think whether it's artificial intelligence or mastermind behind it all, or the chainsaw massacre going on right here behind me, like there's something going on.
Well, play the chainsaw starts up right when we start talking about serious topics, and that's when the government really steps in.
Well, I've got a hockey mask on too. I'm not sure what's going on.
There's a black SUV parked right across the street. I'm not sure what that is.
They're always watching and listening.
I think you create another economy when you try to manage anything at the level of personal responsibility. I think you create an alternate economy, something that can't be tracked. Another thing that we're generating right now is this idea that you're not responsible for your actions and for taking charge of your life and saying, okay, if I smoke, the government is not going to be able to make me stop smoking just because it charges $10, $15, $20 a pack. You can outpay somebody, but somebody that with an addictive personality, somebody that they just shift to something different. And now you have a different problem. I guess that what I'm trying to say is you're always chasing something. If you're expecting the government to take over the responsibility you're always going to be chasing something. And when does that end? It doesn't. And I think we're doing that right now, where the government has taken this role with a lot of people. And I think it's innocent. I think a lot of the people that believe this way, they've got the best intentions. They really want what's best for society. But the problem is they're convinced they're right about everything.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times it's best just say, you know what, that situation will take care of itself. I think social media it'll take care of itself.
Yeah.
I don't think there's but at some point, like you mentioned, parents, we got our kids foolishly, didn't know any better. It was the new craze, man. When iPhones came out, Carol and I were first generation iPhones. So we loved it. I was like, man, this is awesome. I'm gonna get my kids one. I'm gonna be coolest dad ever because I'm gonna get my kids, because I had no idea what was coming. I had who would have known? I mean, this is 2007, 2008, whenever they came out. My kids have come back and told me later everything that they experienced, all the stuff that they shared in their experience with social media, including this platform. I was shocked and had to repent, had to tell them I'm sorry. We didn't know any better. And we would definitely do things differently now. And I'm meeting parents all the time that are different than we are. In other words, there's restrictions, or they don't have a phone yet. They'll be in junior high school and they're like, not yet. But phones are great, though, in the sense that, hey, that gives us access to be able to communicate with our kids during tragic situations where, you feel a sense of safety that you can connect with them. But I think it's just a matter of the innovation and the technology to improve, where parents probably have a little more control. We kept trackers on our kids until recently, and they were okay with that.
Yeah.
They were like, yeah, we don't want to get too crazy sometime where you don't know where we are. They were okay with being tracked, which that's kind of cool that you can, make sure that your kids are okay and safe. But I think that the technology is going to have to improve in certain ways. If a parent does the right research and they at least stay at the same pace with their kids, another problem that we face is our kids were so much smarter than us at a fast rate on how to maneuver around our parental blocks. They knew how to get around the old parental blocks that the
that's the thing. There's no blocks and there's no technology that can't be outwitted. And I look at the internet, not just social media, the whole thing about like say a really, really bad dark alley with lots of crime and danger, and like you wouldn't just drop your kid off at 18 years old and say, go forth and walk down that alley, without having led them along the steps it takes. And I'm not professing to be a parenting expert, but that was the view I took. It's like, okay, we're going to take this journey side by side. And we had blocks, but you know what else we had? We had psychology involved here. They thought I knew and tracked a whole lot more than I had the technical ability to know and track. Probably shouldn't say that out loud, but I don't think they're going to be watching an hour and 7 minutes into the live stream. If they do, like, I could see everything, but was I looking at detailed spreadsheets and reports every morning? No, I wasn't.
No. Well, you just said what I wasn't going to say, but yeah, we bluffed a lot.
It's like quality control in a corporation. You look at a sample, you look at outliers, you look at things, but you can't look at aggregate. And there's no way to do that. But I know cyberbullying and some of those, dangers are very, very real. Big spoiler, no female or probably male on Instagram looks like that in real life. So if that's what you're expecting, your potential mate to look like, you're going to be sorely disappointed. So anyway, I think the government doesn't have a role in it necessarily, or if they do, they'll mess it up. The chainsaw guy went away, so I'm really happy about that. The black van has departed. Because we were talking about things they weren't interested in.
I can tell that the government doesn't care about our realistic conversation. Maybe there is something to Bigfoot, Loch Ness monster, and UFOs, is because that's when they get paranoid and start really tuning in. I've noticed that.
Yeah, we were talking about tobacco, and now most states have decriminalized marijuana, and I was in one of those states a few weeks ago. And I got to see some of the, I'll call it consequences. And I know there's different thoughts. I mean, if alcohol's okay, why is that not? But The difference in legalizing and decriminalizing something. Do we want to talk about that at all, or is that too fine of a point of minutia for the broader conversation?
There was another. Um, well, I'll be a little more. Let, let me say it this way: there was a peer of mine that going back 20 years that I had mentioned that we needed to, well, not 20 years, 15, 17 years, something like that. It was when you and I, we were just become friends about the same time period. And I mentioned to this wonderful person, I said, we need, because you know this, I used to smoke my weight in pot. I mean, had issues in that department and had come through it and was so clean and sober. And I looked at this person and I said, we really need to be praying and get together and talk about what's coming when it comes to marijuana. I said, there seems to be a disconnection between the reality of use and our perception in, let's call it, a moral group, of what's right and wrong in this. There was a disconnection between the two, that somehow these people didn't smoke weed or want to smoke weed, and this people, that the bad ones, that they were doing that. And I said, that is not what's emerging. What's emerging is this gray line that did not used to be there, and predicted that. And I mentioned it to several people, but this one person, their defense, not defense of themselves, but in other words, what I should be focused on. And they were older in the faith, more mature than me, at least by my perception, than I was in the faith. But I could tell that they were extremely naive on the reality of what was happening and what's happened. As they said, brother, I said, what we need to do is just remind them it's illegal. I never, my jaw dropped. And it was one of those situations where I didn't have the credentialing that I have now, where I'd be like, I'm talking to the wrong person, I'm going to ignore you. And I would walk away, and that would have been it. But instead, it crushed me, because there was a short period, maybe a year or so, where I was like, well, I guess I'm wrong about my assessment. But he was being naive. He didn't know any better. He didn't realize, he was so disconnected from everything else in the world. He didn't realize that emergence was very real, and it's happening. I am terrified about the legalization of marijuana, if nothing else, because of my own weaknesses 25 years ago of understanding. It's one thing I say this to some of our people that are recovering from alcoholism, that the idea that somehow that I felt superior, not that I, acted out on that why can't they just quit alcohol? I never had a problem with alcohol, but there's you can buy drinks on every corner. You can go to a gas station and buy a drink. You can go here and buy a drink. And now something like marijuana that does scratch where it itches, in some of my weaknesses, it's available. You can buy whatever that one stuff, the gummy stuff. You can buy
gummy bears or whatever they are. Yeah,
you can buy that everywhere. And so now in churches, there's this little trickle of people who saying, I might have a problem, because they were taking it for pain or whatever. And now you're starting to see a little bit of that. And I'm definitely compassionate towards people with anxiety. I'm compassionate towards, without a doubt. So I don't
seizures and other legitimate cancer patients for sure.
But it seems to have worked better. And again, this may almost contradicts me the stuff I said earlier, but this is where I'm at now on it, is that when we seem to work out better for the most part when doctors handle that, but doctors help contribute to the opioid crisis too.
Oh.
So I've got mixed feelings on it. The jury's not in as far as it, from a scriptural standpoint, because that's not necessarily what we're talking about right now. The jury's in, mind's made up, whatever. And addiction in general, it should be avoided at all costs for anything. And you can get addicted to anything. But we're talking about as far as the legality of it. For somebody who loves small government now, like I do, it's that part of me says we need to make sure that the government stays out. I mean, how many people have been sent to jail for life over marijuana distribution? And it seems to be weighted towards race, and that's unfortunate. It's terrible. Yeah. That's terrible, and that must be addressed, because God loves justice, and there's been an injustice that's taken place there. But a free for all, even under the current situation, we can argue things like, and this is another cop out. Well, we need to keep it at the state level. Let the states decide. Maybe that's true. Maybe that's the answer. but there does seem to be some evidence that suggests that our young people who it's for their generation, my kids' generation, and the people that come after, it's been normal for them. It's been a normal part of their life. It's what we've done is we've opened the barn door and given them just about 24-hour access to yet another substance. And whereas our generation escaped that, and that makes maybe somebody who does use marijuana occasionally a little more disciplined or whatever, there's a generation behind them, though, that's coming after us, I should say. They're going to have a lot to overcome with the access that they have.
Dare we talk about the United States' #1 export as it relates to unfettered access and the generational issues we have coming?
Go ahead. Start us.
Pornography.
Wow. I'll tell you this. I am disgusted by the amount. We seem to be pro-women in our society. I think that's great. But I'm disgusted that some of the same people that are pro-women, freedom of women and women, you can do it, women power, that also support the pornography, the world of pornography. I think that's the most disgusting thing, one of the most disgusting things about our society right now is there's been very little good that comes, from that industry whatsoever, if any good at all, as far as the financial. The joke is that pornography built the internet. I'm sure you've heard that before. And giving people the access that they have. Medical things aside, that because I keep getting informed through something I subscribe to. It's a medical journal online that Men's Health kind of thing going on, that talk about some of the results of what pornography does across a 20-year time period, a 30-year time period, a 4-year time period, how damaging it is.
The brain.
Yes. It may be worse. We talked about social media. That may be worse than social media, the damage social media can cause, the dopamine release and things like that. But for women in general, I think it is so wrong for young men. We talk about again, I can't even watch something on the Disney Channel now, like an MCU show, without it portraying men looking bad and women looking awesome. Women are always trying to teach the men the lesson and this, that, and the other, because they're trying to correct things in the past that have been bad for women. But the first thing that we should be correcting is the pornography industry, like completely limiting it. But I mean, Toby, it's not happening. If anything, it's growing and it's normalized.
And don't hear Bill or I being judgmental on any of these issues. What breaks my heart on this particular subject is kind of twofold. One was, it's probably more related to the Instagram and the other things. But again, I mentioned I was at a university today, and I've only been out of college for about 25 years, so I'm not super old. I'm not, I'm old. I've got kids that age now, but most of the girls were barely dressed, all the incoming freshmen. And it's sad. They're little girls, so I didn't view it through an angle of anything other than just shock, surprise. And then there's the really dark side of this topic. And Kirk and I talked about this a few weeks ago because he went to a trip to Colombia to help address this issue, but it's the trafficking piece. I think the society's need for darker, worse, like the exponential growth is caused the trafficking issue to really go forward. And they're doing great work in Colombia. They're rescuing women from these traffickers, and they're teaching them job skills and things. But the damage being done, to your point, to the women, we can't say we're for women's rights and that all these things are okay. I'm not saying legislate them. I'm not saying there's a conspiracy behind them, but you can't talk out of both sides of your mouth.
It's pitiful what that industry does to women, in the sense that we talk about exploitation. That's exactly what that is. And now it's not like it's not hurting young men either, as far as the people in the industry. But it's making things more difficult. And you'll see these pieces all the time, whether it's on YouTube or news, where you'll see a woman defending the industry. But to me, that's just clever marketing tactics. I don't see anybody in their right mind would be able to defend that industry. There's just no defense of it. It's tragic. I think in some ways it's worse than prostitution in some ways. And I could, that's probably for another podcast or whatever. I know this, that from, hearing people, they'll come to the office in church and talk about their issues and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And more than marijuana, more than drugs, alcohol, anything, pornography is one of the number one issues that the person is looking at me, male and female. It's not just male dominated anymore. That's another misnomer, is that it's male dominated. It's not just male dominated.
Wow.
And looking at you and going, I can't stop. I can't stop. And that's, to me, that's, isn't that the very definition of what addiction is? I mean, come on. I mean, that's the problem right there, is the person, there's no control at this point. We talk about legislating morality, but there is a such thing as way entirely too much access at different age levels, to where kids as young as 8, 9 years old have access to, whether it be a channel or whether it be, I call it, soft porn, where it may not be what is classified as pornography, but what they used to say, that marijuana was a stepping stone drug,
a gateway drug, right?
Gateway. Yeah. And they dismiss that now. But at the same time, I do think there's things that we have readily available now that is a gateway to the other stuff. Not to mention the fact of what it leads to in the relationship between, let's say, a husband and wife, the things that it leads to in that situation, because it promotes performance. And that's a pretty big issue in the bedroom. That's a problem in marriages, that they end up going into the bedroom instead of, the intimacy between a man and a woman, and it becomes performance. How do I perform to entertain my spouse, as opposed to actually, I know it's a family channel, but making love, to appreciating one another and the value that they have. It becomes, how many hoops do I jump through here and to impress this person? Because what you see in pornography is not what you would call it. It's not making love. It's performance. It's not even as closely related as we talk about on our videos, where the last time we got together for a podcast, we talked about, when you're out on the trail and you're making a video, how much goes into creativity, and then how much is just being yourself and being authentic. That's inauthentic from start to finish. There's no authenticity in it whatsoever. And then all of a sudden you get in the bedroom, and that's what you're copying. So you're copying something fake to begin with. I hope I didn't go too far into that. You can always get this out.
Well, it's a fake imitation of the real thing, just like everything that would fall into the category of what we're talking about. Something that's interesting that I looked at a few years back, and I haven't looked at it in a while. I look at numbers and investing and financial metrics and things. And there was a very popular mutual fund that took a bucket of what we'll call sin stocks: tobacco, casinos, probably pornography. So all the things that are legal, the companies, the ones that are the most environmental, some of the lowest scores. And I looked at that just out of intellectual curiosity over the period of several years, and it always underperforms the more socially responsible companies. So we like to use the word social responsibility, and we think about, tree hugging and environmentalism. And I'm a tree hugger. I'm an environmentalist. I love the outdoors and nature as much as anybody. I'll pick up trash that I didn't throw down when I'm out on the trails.
Sure, absolutely.
And I'm not gonna, throw garbage in a pristine lake or anything like that.
Right.
I'm an environmentalist from that perspective, but there's a lot more to social responsibility now than just environmentalism. So we talk about the government. We also got to think about the corporate roles in these. Like, when is a corporation an individual, and when are they a collective of a body of people as it relates to a lot of the social issues that are out there? ESG, it's called environmental social governance, is one of the biggest, hottest topics today. Companies have scores for that.
Yeah.
And a lot of people make decisions on who they'll do business with, who they'll invest with, based on that metric. Now, I don't know if that metric or any other metric or what they're measuring is going to relate in significantly better financial performance over a long period of time or not. But it is fascinating to think about, tying this into the last topic even, if you do the right thing for a long enough period of time, maybe you really do come out ahead. It's something I've been thinking about a lot lately.
I agree. It's I mean, yeah, do I ever? I'm worried a little bit about the ESG.
Yeah.
There's
Are they
definitely,
measuring the right things? I put that caveat right in the middle of that
yeah.
conversation.
The hysterical part of it, I'm definitely what I would call a 1970s environmentalist. It's when it comes to clean air and clean water. And if I've said this before on your channel, I apologize. There was a time when I kept trying to engage modern environmentalists, like to engage like into the conversation because I want clean air and clean water. I think it's great, but if you have to, it's one of those situations where you almost have to buy into all of their talking points in order to engage into a conversation. So it doesn't feel like the old school environment, where, do the right thing, pick up your garbage when you're hiking, carry your garbage out, you're going to be fine. And the focus on being better citizens. Instead, there's this whole litany of things that you have to. I think we don't share the same values. I think that's a part of the problem in our country anyway. And I don't want to speak for the whole world. I don't live in the whole world. I live in the US. So, but it seems to be global, where we all don't share the same values anymore. And so even though, for instance, I mean, by what you just said about loving the environment, I love the environment. Then there's things that kind of change. For instance, when I was younger, I hated logging. I mean, I thought logging was the evilest thing ever. How are they cutting these trees down? Until it dawned on me, first of all, it's a pretty important industry. We consume a lot of things that require trees, and it's renewable. Turns out it's renewable. It's okay. So you grow, you change, and the ability to go, okay, wait a minute, logging is actually really important. You start noticing messaging, that where you may be used to seeing something at a national park, a sign that says, one of the things that we talked about this recently, where the national parks and our national forests, they're kind of run logging. They're together. They have a great relationship now. But if you look at all the signs around national parks, they all point towards how logging was the worst thing that ever happened. But I'm like, wait a minute. In other words, it's kind of proving their existence. We are the ones that reined in logging. And it's like, okay, all right. But it sort of still demonizes logging for people. They walk around, them's terrible loggers. I think corporations doing the right thing for the sake of doing the right thing is important, but I think it's probably best not to hold our breath on that.
Yeah.
I think it's best to understand that there was a time where it wasn't. A lot of people, when they say government now, they're not really meaning government. What they're meaning is the umbrella of power, just in general, right? Government, corporate, all of that, big business, whatever you want to call it, one umbrella of power. But we didn't used to feel that way, did we? I mean, used to, the government kept the corporations in check. It was the government that told Rockefeller, you're going to have to, you got a monopoly. You got to fix this. But now we don't. I don't think most people see it as. I think most people see government and corporate as one and the same. So we don't. It's almost like if corporations, if they're making a lot of money, if they're very successful, I don't know that we can rely on them to do the right thing where the most things need to happen. But I think we do get a lot of distractions.
Yes.
I think we get a lot of distractions and a lot of arguments that really, it's not an argument. It wasn't an argument till you brought it up. Now when you brought it up and you're preaching it all the time, it becomes a talking point, but it wasn't it wasn't even a thing. But while I'm looking over here and I'm engaged into this argument, I'm missing out on all of these other things that are taking place, whether it's wage stagnation or this or that went on for 30 years before it became, mainstream. Because why? We were arguing about other stuff that wasn't that important at the time.
Miles, welcome to the podcast. We're about an hour and a half in, so we talked about some lighter topics. We're into a little bit heavier stuff now, but it's all the deep, dark secrets that the man, as Bill just referred, doesn't want us to know. So definitely go back and watch the beginning. I am, for those who don't know, are watching this later, the kilted adventurer. So I do celebrate my Scottish heritage. I'm an American, but I've also got a St. Andrew's flag on, and the picked paint is just to keep it more light because these are such dark topics like Sasquatch, Loch Ness monster, UFOs, transporter technology, uh, methane from cows, and all the other topics we've covered tonight, Bill. I mean, we have revealed so many things that I don't think they want people to know. And the latter few topics were pretty serious, but we're still talking about what's behind the veil, what's behind the curtain. So that's the common thread for our entire discussion tonight.
Isn't it funny though, when you start, we took a turn in the conversation, we start talking about more serious topics. And if, whether it's watched in the future, let's say somebody watches this whole thing later on and we're able to look at the analytics or whatever. I guarantee you, as soon as we started talking about more serious discussion, there will be a drop rate. And I think that's going all the way back to the beginning of what we were talking about when we first started the podcast. Is one of the reasons why we want there to be a Sasquatch. We want UFOs is because we don't want to engage on these other conversations. We don't want to talk. Like Miles Kane's here, who's commented several times. Seems like a nice guy. He said, "What is the significance of?" No, I'm sorry. It was another comment. He said, "Never seen anyone in rehab for pot."
Yeah, you're behind a little bit, Bill, but it's okay.
I bring it up. Actually, brought it up for a reason. The reason why I brought it, I have never seen anybody in rehab for pot. I've just seen them without a job. I've seen him with that. So that would be and I'm not trying to zinger because it's a great comment, and especially if you're an old pothead like I am from way back in the day. That was always our defense is, nobody's going to kill somebody over weed, even though drug trafficking in general, including marijuana, for decades did generate a lot of violence. Now, of course, the legalization that's changed matter, but you will find a lethargy amongst potheads. Not everybody, I got to admit that. There's a lot of people, that worked where I used to work there with you, that they'd come in blazed or whatever, and they were fine. They worked. I have to be honest about that. They worked fine. But yeah.
Tom's actually got an amazing story. I know him. He's clean and sober for a bunch of years now.
Wow.
And God's done an amazing work in his life. So really appreciate you jumping on, bud. And for everyone else, Walter and Miles, I know you said you're going to go back and watch later, and all the rest that are on here, Billy. It's hard to name everybody because this has been such a dynamic conversation about so many different, really fun things. You have anything else like that's just really boiling in the back of your brain, or have we done enough damage for one night?
The thing we didn't get into is liminal space, and I'm glad, and the reason why, because again, and it's pish posh, it's silliness, but it's so fun. Like a lot of these topics, they're just fun.
Yeah.
And that's for some other time. But if you've never heard of this liminal space thing, it's an architectural term, but it's turned conspiracy. Check it out, go do some YouTubing and get into that. Because I was like, these people, and it all started with this one channel that did it's kind of just mysterious. There's no talking. I don't even think there's music on it, but I don't forget how many millions and millions of views now. And it was just these hallways that are empty. And then that sparked, but it was a continuation. Then they'd have another episode where they'd give you a little bit more of a hint, and then another episode. But then that has generated a conspiracy within itself that has sort of taken over the conspiracy world. But it was hilarious. I kept seeing it come up on the feed, and I was like, "What is this? I don't have time for this." And I get the fascination with it. I get it. But it's the idea that people are building up this whole narrative that wasn't there before. So 10 years from now, it's going to be this big conspiracy. You can see it developing. It's like, this was a spoof. It's a gag, but it's turned real. And as far as real in people's minds or whatever. And it's just kind of a fascinating thing, spaces between spaces and all that kind of stuff. It's fun.
Bill, thanks for joining me tonight.
Absolutely.
I appreciate you putting up with the nonsense between the painted face, the very odd light situation we set up here on purpose. We've had a lot of fun, and I want everyone who has joined tonight to give my appreciation as well. Thank you for that. Bill and I both have outdoor travel channels. They're very different, but they're both very entertaining in their own way. So make sure you check his channel out, subscribe to his channel and mine if you haven't. We've seen some returning folks and some new folks in the chat today, so really appreciate that. I'm glad that we now know the truth. When I hear things go bump in the night, I'll no longer fear. I've satiated my desires. both subtle and gross. We've accomplished what we set out to do, Bill.
We
This has
did.
been a fun night.
We fixed society tonight. It's fixed.
We have just stirred it up to the point to where it's completely crystal clear now.
I appreciate you having me on, Toby. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Bill. I'll catch you next time.
All right, buddy. We'll see you.